Hello, everyone, and welcome to yet another Horizons discussion, an event series that was initially launched as a offshoot of Horizons, a quarterly journal of international affairs and sustainable development, published by the Center for International Relations and Sustainable Development in Belgrade, Serbia. It is the only publication in Southeast Europe that's available on JSTOR, and the only publication that features both sitting office holders, policymakers, and a host of highly distinguished scholars around the world. Quite often, these scholars and these thinkers that lead the world's intellectual elite are some of the people that have very contrasting views that we are very proud to assemble in one place and oftentimes in one issue. Today, we're going to be discussing the recent developments in the Middle East, more specifically the latest round of escalation of the conflict between Israel and Iran, and even more specifically, the more overt involvement of the United States over the past weekend. My name is Stefan Antic. I am the managing editor of Horizons and a senior research fellow at the Center for International Relations and Sustainable Development. Today, I am joined by Dr. James M. Dorsey, a prolific writer and someone who we've been very privileged to feature multiple times in the pages of Horizons. He is an award-winning journalist and scholar and an expert on a great many topics, including Middle Eastern geopolitics, security, and social issues, but also a variety of other issues, including terrorism in Southeast Asia and Africa, and the appeal of political Islam in different geographies. He's an honorary fellow at the National University of Singapore's Middle East Institute and an adjunct senior fellow at the Nanyang Technological University's Rajaratnam School of International Studies. He is the author of the syndicated column and blog, The Turbulent World of Middle East Soccer, and a similarly themed podcast, The Turbulent World with James M. Dorsey. Dr. Dorsey, thank you so much for joining.
Stefan, it's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Speaking of a turbulent world, we've just had quite a turbulent weekend. This session, in fact, is being recorded on June the 23rd in the morning hours. So if any developments happen in the meantime, anything that might contradict what we're saying here, we're just keep in mind that we're trying to keep pace with everything, with fast developments on the ground in the Middle East. Namely, American B-2 bombers carried out unprecedented strikes against Iran's nuclear facilities in Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan, marking the beginning of what could truly be a dangerous escalation, whether in diplomatic or military terms, and possibly even beyond the confines of the Middle Eastern region. But what happened over the past couple of days and the past weeks seems like a continuation of a broader chain of events that was initiated on October 7th, 2023, when Hamas launched its perhaps most organized attack against Israeli civilians. And then what followed was a full-blown war between Israel and Hamas, the now widely discussed incursion of the Israeli military into the Gaza Strip, numerous clashes between the Israeli army and Hezbollah on the Lebanese border, the liquidation of much of the leadership of Hezbollah in the meantime, the fall of Bashar al-Assad in Syria, and the assassination of several leaders of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps in Iran. All of these actors and groups had either direct ties to Iran or were somewhat friendly to the Islamic Republic. And it's safe to say that given these developments, Iran's capability to project power in the Middle East has been somewhat degraded. But despite all of this, what has persisted is the rhetoric about the imminent Iranian threat, which we hear quite often from both the Israeli officials and American officials nowadays. So nowadays, the social media is flooded with footage, archival footage, quite often, of the sitting Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, who's been issuing these warnings about imminent Iranian threat for the better part of the last 30 years. So with that in mind, I just want to ask, was there an imminent threat? Was this latest round of escalation really warranted? And is the threat exaggerated by any means?
Let me paint a very broad picture. Obviously, October 7, 2023, the Hamas attack on Israel was a paradigm-shifting event. One of the things that it shifted is, as far as I'm concerned, Israeli defense doctrine. Israeli defense doctrine prior to October 7 essentially was built on the principle of deterrence and military superiority. October 7 was paradigm shifting. It broke a psychological barrier in Israel. This was the first time that Israeli towns and cities were occupied. People were slaughtered in their homes. It was unprecedented. And as a result, Israel's defense doctrine is no longer happy with deterrence. Its defense doctrine today is emasculation. Whether you translate that in terms of Netanyahu and Israel's insistence that they will destroy and politically and militarily Hamas, not defeat it. The same language was used with Hezbollah and the clearing out of southern Lebanon and replacing it, with what is essentially a weak Lebanese army, or the immediate response, almost on the same day, of Israel to the fall of Bashar al-Assad in Syria and the rise of former jihadists to take over the government, which was to decimate the Syrian military, its infrastructure, its weapons arsenal, to declare southern Syria, with other words, the area south of Damascus, a no-go zone for the Syrian military, and express or to position Israel as a protector of Syrian minorities. And we're seeing basically that same pattern in Iran. So that's one big element here. The second element is that you have that Netanyahu, for much of his career, certainly as you mentioned, for the past 30-something years, has gone against the grain of what the intelligence community, by and large, was saying, what the International Atomic Energy is saying, and both have said in recent weeks, at best the last 2 months, that Iran is not building a nuclear weapon. Now, keep in mind that you also have to understand that Iran is not its best friend, nor is it very good at making friends. On the contrary. But having said that, I think we've got to keep in mind, and that's where some of the spin takes place, is how we got to 60% nuclear enrichment, and 60% is high. From there to 90% is not simply another third. It's a very short distance, in a sense. We got there because U.S. President Trump walked away from the 2015 international agreement, and Iran's response to that was, for the first year, to continue to adhere to that agreement, and then progressively to abandon adherence to provisions of the agreement. One of those was the level of enrichment. It did so not because it wanted to build a bomb, but because it wanted to increase leverage and try and force a return to the 2015 international agreement. That's a strategy that has boomeranged in a sense. It's boomeranged in two ways. It's been turned against Iran as evidence that it is trying to build a nuclear weapon. And of course, as the pressure on Iran increased, and keep in mind that Trump in his first term was using the term of pursuing a policy of maximum pressure. As the pressure increased, and as Israel's defense doctrine changed, resulting in the Israeli strikes against Iran that started about 10 days ago, the voices for building a nuclear weapon as deterrence, partly because Iran had been weakened in a number of ways, the way you mentioned in your introduction, the voices for a nuclear weapon are growing in Iran. So I think there's a bigger picture here in the building blocks that one has to understand to try and evaluate where we are now.
It's the thing you just mentioned about Iranian strategy backfiring in a big way. Okay, so their strategy was to increase leverage, as you say, but given what just happened, just a day and a half ago, what is the U.S. strategy? What is the U.S. strategy in the Middle East? What is the U.S. strategy with Iran today? The U.S. Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, just said that these strikes on the three of Iran's nuclear facilities quite literally obliterated Iran's nuclear ambition. Is that really true? And if so, what remains of the U.S. strategy? What drives U.S. strategy with regards to Iran nowadays? What is the U.S. to gain from an engagement?
That's the $64,000 question. Your guess is as good as mine. I mean, look at the last 24 hours. You had on Sunday morning U.S. time, the Secretaries of State and Defense, Marco Rubio, and Pete Hegseth, and the U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance, publicly stating the strike against the three nuclear facilities was a limited strike. We are not aiming for regime change. Several hours later, you get a tweet from the president saying, why not regime change? If this regime can't make Iran great again, let's change the regime. So, is that policy? Again, your guess is as good as mine. I think what I do think is I don't know that there's a policy. What I do know is that there different groups vying for the president's ear and trying to influence the president, and it's a power struggle within the administration and within the power base of the president, in which the pendulum swings. So fundamentally, you have two groups, and all kinds of subgroups, of course. But you have the Make America Great Again, or the America First crowd, which fundamentally does not believe that Israeli and U.S. interests at all times overlap. Questions what interests the United States has in the Middle East. And it often has been somewhat more restrained when it comes to Iran. And you have that versus pro-Israel figures within the administration. So if you look at what Trump has done on the Middle East over the last 5 months or 5 months since he came to office for a second term, by and large, America first, make America great again. People were on the ascendancy. You had a session in early February in the Oval Office in which Netanyahu winced because one issue after the other was being enunciated and pursued in exactly the other direction than what he had been pushing for. You had the truth with the Houthis, in which the United States agreed with the Houthi rebels in Yemen that there wouldn't be any targeting of U.S. assets. And if they target Israel, that's Israel's problem, not ours. You had a succession of those issues. Now, the one issue where there may have been more, and of course, on the one issue where there was a closer coincidence of views between Netanyahu and Trump, was Gaza. But even on Gaza, U.S. officials, for the first time ever, met face to face with Hamas. And these were Trump's officials. So now, on the other hand, Trump legitimized a notion of ethnic cleansing of Gaza when he came out with his Trump plan, which was to resettle the population elsewhere and turn Gaza into a high-end luxury resort development. And Netanyahu jumped on it. This was a gift from heaven. And he made it a war goal, not just war policy. So on Gaza, you've seen some degree of coincidence. Even on Iran, I mean, Netanyahu was dead set against negotiations with Iran. I think that we moved from negotiations to U.S. military strikes, essentially because Trump's I mean, some people say taco, Trump always withdraws, but there's also the other side of this coin, which is Trump's negotiating strategy. Trump's negotiating strategy is, this is what we're going to do. You're going to do this. This is the deadline for this. And if you don't do it and don't meet the deadline, then all hell breaks loose and you're going to be very sorry for what happens. That's what happened on Iran. That's essentially what happened. Trump went into this, and Trump had a problem in the nuclear negotiations, which few people point out, but one has to keep in mind, which may be the reason why he settled on zero enrichment. Trump walked away from the agreement in 2018, an agreement Iran had been adhering to, which has had serious consequences for the region and caused serious problems. It also had some advantages, to be clear, including the rapprochement between the Gulf states and Iran, which brought a greater degree of stability, a sense of stability, until October 7 to the Middle East. But for him to conclude a new agreement with Iran, he has to be able to say that this agreement is substantially different and substantially better. And obviously, zero enrichment fulfills that criteria. The problem, of course, is that his language, which is, I'm in command here, I tell you what to do, you do, as well as his notions of deadlines, are not things that were going to go down well in Iran. So you can argue that, in a sense, that if that was his attitude, these negotiations were doomed, even though the Iranians were serious. So when Trump now says the Iranians weren't serious, we had to go in. Yeah, I mean, in his terms, they weren't serious because they weren't going to play a game of Simon Says.
Something you just said reminds me of what we could classify as the Trump doctrine, which has largely come down to repeal and replace in many aspects before, whether it's trade negotiations, domestic policy. Uh, Sometimes he's had success with that, like with NAFTA, for instance, but arguably, Trump attempted during his first term to do a trade deal with China that started off as a trade war that eventually, when he was voted out of office, his successors ended up continuing. So the trade war continued, and there was no trade
Right.
deal. So how high is a risk of something like that happening in the Middle East? Is it even higher if you try to
Well,
repeal and replace
well,
and do a Trump Iran deal, perhaps Iran
well,
deal 2.0?
you can argue that it's already happened. It happened when Trump repealed, if you wish, walked away from the 2015 international agreement, and now you've got a war going on. So, in that sense, it's already happened. Now, would an Iran agreement that Trump signed, an agreement that Trump signs with Iran, would that be repealed by the next government? Highly unlikely. The next U.S. government. Um, on the contrary. But I think that repeal effect we've already seen. In fact, beyond that.
Uh, I just want to point your attention to something that another highly distinguished author of Horizons said in the past in his December 2024 interview. And he put it in very straightforward terms. I'm talking about Columbia University professor Jeffrey Sachs, who said that Israel has run American foreign policy in the Middle East for 30 years. If there is some overlap between U.S. and Israeli foreign policy in the Middle East, and if there are some camps, as you say, that are taking a more withdrawn stance, relative to what Israel wants, what can be characterized as Israel's top objectives in the Middle East today, apart from obviously the emasculation doctrine that you mentioned earlier, and how naive is it to think what some commentators suggest, that only if Benjamin Netanyahu and his cabinet are voted out of office, this will all be thought of in different terms, and you will have a new face of Israel that behaves entirely differently. What do you make of these statements and these sorts of assessments?
First of all, Jeffrey Sachs belongs to a school of thought that sort of thinks control is with the Israeli lobby. The Israeli lobby is extremely powerful. There's no question about it. I think, first of all, you've got to keep in mind that the lobby is split. You now have a progressive lobby and you have the traditional lobby. But more importantly, Israel probably has the single largest grassroots community in the United States of any foreign or ethnic community in the world, whether it's Greeks, Turks, Serbs, whoever it may be. Nothing compares to the numbers and the influence that the community sympathetic with Israel can command. These are not Jews. These are American Christians. The numbers go up to 100 million. Evangelicals, Christian Zionists, Christian nationalists, not all of whose, as far as I'm concerned, whose motives and attitudes towards Jews are ones that I would appreciate and not describe as not prejudiced or not even racist. But nonetheless, this is what Israel's community is. This is what a major power within the Republican Party. So it's, with other words, the notion that the Israel lobby, directed from Jerusalem, is what controls U.S. policy. It's the people who vote for successive U.S. governments that propagate U.S. pro-U.S. policies. At times, policies to the detriment of the United States, not only internationally, but also domestically, in terms of, look at anti-boycott laws, for example. Look at what's going on with freedom of expression and academic freedom. So in that sense, I would disagree with the Jeffrey Sachses of this world. As it relates to what changes if and when we see the back of Netanyahu and his government, there'll be change, no question about it. The tone can very well be different. You're not going to have the extremists as such. But is Israeli policy fundamentally going to change? I wouldn't bet on that. There is 82% support for the current attacks on Iran. There is no opposition virtually no opposition to the Gaza war on the grounds that Palestinians have national rights, or on the grounds that the Israeli military is committing war crimes, or on the grounds that the humanitarian crisis in Gaza is such that something needs to be done. As far as a majority of Israelis are concerned, we need to end this war to get our hostages out. And once we have the hostages out, there'll be at some point in the future we'll have an opportunity to finish up with the Gazans. Those attitudes, whether towards Iran or whether towards the Palestinians, I think you're going to see in whatever government comes to office. Don't forget that Israeli settlements in the West Bank, as well as in Gaza, were started under the Labour Party. They were started under what was considered to be a leftist government. They weren't started by the right. I mean, they came before Menachem Begin became prime minister in 1977. I remember many years ago, long before she became Yasser Arafat's wife, going out for lunch and we were friends with the lady who became Yasser Arafat's wife. And she said to me, look, the difference between the Labour Party and the right wing in Israel is Labour wants to eat us with a knife and fork. They want to be nice about it. The right wing just wants to gobble us up. And that's essentially true.
That's that's a very scary analogy. Yeah, but yeah.
Yeah,
I understand.
we were having delicious fish in Akko on the coast.
So speaking of scary things, I just want to entertain the scenario of a prolonged conflict that lasts for nobody knows how long in the Middle East between Israel and Iran. And in such a scenario, I feel that the technological edge and the military capabilities are clearly on the Israeli side. But even a superficial examination and in comparison of the pools of human resources clearly favor Iran. So my question to you is essentially, can Iran outlast Israel if this ends up being a prolonged conflict?
Look, I think there's a multi-layered question here. Let me take this beyond the current hostilities going on. I, for very long, argued that the three or three and a half hegemonic powers or major powers in the Middle East are not Arab states, with one exception. They're Turkey, they're Iran, they're Egypt, and the half a state would be Israel. They're not Saudi Arabia, they're not Qatar, they're not Doha. If you look at all of those states, Israel leaving Israel aside, these are countries with huge populations. They're countries with a history of empire, with a history that goes thousands. They're very secure in their identity. They're not newly found countries. They're countries that have economies in disrepair, but once they can repair those economies, they're huge markets. They have battle-hardened armies and militaries, and they have geography. What the Gulf offers is primarily money. And of course, Saudi Arabia has Mecca and Medina. There's no doubt about it. So I think that's what you're looking at the long-term picture. Short term, what you're seeing is with Israel and Iran, two countries at each other's throat, whose governments are highly unpopular. In both countries, presumably a majority of the population would like to see the back of their leaders. The sooner, the better. Yet, what this war has done it's rallied people around the government, not because they suddenly have fallen back in love with the government, but because they're rallying around the flag at a moment that the state is viewed to be in jeopardy and in danger. Which basically means that, sure, Iran is roughly 20 times the population of Israel, maybe 10 times, if you whichever way you want to count it. Sure, but it doesn't. I'm not sure it really matters. First of all, these are two countries that don't border on each other, so you're not talking about invasions. Israel's not about to try and invade Iran and occupy a country of 5 or 10 million, trying to occupy 90 million. And that's when. So I think that idea that and to be fair to Iran, it's shown a great deal of cohesion and resilience. You had on the first day of the Israeli strikes, the military parts of the military leadership wiped out, parts of the nuclear science community wiped out, facilities severely damaged, if not wiped out. They had within hours, they had new leaders, and they were sending missiles against Israel. So they do have that resilience and cohesion. The issue here is also that it's not just Israel's superiority is not just technological. First of all, it has demonstrated a degree of intelligence penetration into Iran that is, amazing. It demonstrates that similarly with Hezbollah. So, I mean, last Friday you had a unidentified nuclear scientist who's supposedly a weaponization specialist who went into hiding in a safe place. That's where he ended his life. And that was Israeli intelligence. So that's one factor. The second factor is, and this goes to a broader issue again, is that, let's be realistic, Iran doesn't have an air force worth mentioning. its air defenses have been severely weakened already last year in 2 Israeli strikes. You haven't, sure, you've seen a drone be downed, but beyond that, Israel has not really encountered great problems because of anti-air defenses in Iran. It doesn't have a navy for all practical purposes. It's got fast boats. So as a result, and this is part of the broader picture, that's why Iran relies on ballistic missiles and drones. It is that, together with the non-state allies, Hezbollah, Hamas, by the way, the relationship with Iran was very troubled, at times. And the Iraqi groups, the Houthis, whatever. That was basically Iran's defense, because because of sanctions, which it has partly has itself to blame for, but nonetheless, that now the problem for Iran in this confrontation is it has granted one of the Middle East, if not the Middle East's largest arsenal of ballistic and other and missiles and what have you, but it's finite. Its ability to replenish is very limited because of the Israeli strikes, and because of its access to materials. On the other hand, Israel probably can replenish its interceptors. The United States will be very helpful on that. So, Iran's chances, at least conventional ways of striking back, are limited and increasingly limited over time, which leaves it really only with asymmetric responses, or responses that really risk expanding the conflict.
And this is a perfect way to segue into my next question, which I wanted to basically pose in the following way. Given that we've covered everything that they cannot do and explore their limits, what is in Iran's toolkit when it comes to retaliation? Are they reconsidering retaliation, and are they at this point maybe reluctant to retaliate in a big way, given the response they will be inviting from both the United States and Israel, and given what just happened to them and their 3 nuclear facilities being severely bombed out? How likely is Iran to return to diplomacy? But diplomacy under Trumpian terms or Netanyahu's terms? How likely do you think that is?
Look, essentially, Iran doesn't have good options. It's not a war it can wear militarily. It's clearly trying with the missile attacks to raise the pain threshold for Israel, and to hope that the Israelis are going to get wary and may become more flexible. But as a matter of principle, this is not a conflict it can win. And yet, on the other hand, it can't. Trump was very clear about it. He wants unconditional surrender. Unconditional surrender would leave aside all the claims, which are true. Iranians are proud, this, that, and the other. This is a regime, if it surrenders, it basically loses the last fig leaf for its legitimacy. So that's not an option. There's no question in my mind that the Iranians want to negotiate. There's actually no question in my mind that Trump wants to negotiate. I think they have different definitions of what negotiation means. But the Iranians have been very clear that they are not going to negotiate with a gun put to their head. And they may very well go down fighting. But
If I may
having
jump
said
in,
that,
if I may jump in and ask one question that immediately comes to mind, uh, if there is a set of circumstances that allows for a negotiation, who is the perfect mediator for such a negotiation?
it's a good question. As a matter of principle, I would say either the United Nations, possibly one of the Gulf states. Um, but again, the problem with this is you need a negotiator who has clout or seemingly has clout in Jerusalem. That's not the Gulf states. That's not the United Nations. That clout is in Washington. But coming back to your question about what alternatives Iran has, they have multiple alternatives, not all of them necessarily good. I think interestingly enough, and it's too early to say, just in the last hour, Israel's been having another barrage of incoming missiles. The sirens were not only going off in Tel Aviv, they were going off in Amman, in Jordan, because the missiles were coming across Jordanian airspace. So, we're now roughly 48 hours, 36 hours away since the U.S. strikes against the nuclear facilities. Iran's response so far has been against Israel. And it may very well be that the Iranians limit it to responding to Israel, because a lot of the other options, while perfectly possible, are also very risky. We don't know whether the strikes against Israel in the last 24, 36 hours are Iran's response to the U.S. strikes, or whether they are responses to Israeli strikes. Over and beyond that, there are all sort of options that have been listed, striking out at U.S. Diplomatic and military facilities in the region, potentially striking at a Gulf exporting infrastructure. That, of course, one risks losing, maybe not the support, but in any case, a degree of hedging bets on the part of, for example, the Gulf states, where the Gulf states express concern, call for an end to the conflict. You hit their soil, you may get a very different tone. On top of which, you may also get a U.S. response. There's the option, of course, of asymmetric warfare. With other words, targeting U.S. or Israeli targets, or for that matter, Jewish targets elsewhere in the world. Again, that's a risky strategy because you may get a very strong response. There's the Strait of Hormuz, which you mentioned. You just had the Iranian parliament on Monday, barely a day after the U.S. strikes, voting in favor of closing the Strait of Hormuz. That's a decision that has to be ratified by the National Security Council, which the council has not done, and ultimately, presumably, decided by the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. Again, you close off the Straits of Hormuz, you're probably going to not only get Israel and the United States breathing down your neck, but also the Europeans. So, in that sense, and then finally, there are the non-kinetic responses that are possible, including, for example, the withdrawal from the Non-Proliferation Treaty. So basically, Iran doesn't have good options, but it's a regime that's got no good options either. The last
Another,
thing, let me
yeah,
just
of
add
course.
one more last thing. I mean, theoretically, you could argue that Khamenei could do what Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, the founder of the Islamic Republic, did in 1988, when he said he was swallowing a poisonous chalice to end the Iran-Iraq war, which he didn't start in the first place. So theoretically, it's possible that Ali Khamenei finds a poisonous chalice, but I wouldn't count on it.
There is another topic that is highly pertinent when it comes to the Middle East, because in a way, Middle East has for long served as a graveyard of empires and great powers as well. And I just want to talk a little bit about great power competition. As we both know full well, each when you have a great power competition, each power revels in the misfortunes and entanglements of the other. Given the past entanglements of the United States with two of Iran's neighbors, Iraq and Afghanistan, uh, is this just the beginning of another American adventure in the Middle East that China will revel in now that we have intensified competition between the U.S. and China? Do you think that's at all realistic?
I doubt it. First of all, let's keep in mind that neither China nor Russia is capable politically or militarily of replacing the United States in the Gulf. We may live in an increasingly bipolar or tripolar world, depending how India plays out. We may have second-tier states, the Saudis, the Brazilians, the South Africans, the Nigerians, the larger forces in the global South, being more able to hedge their bets. But in the Middle East, when it comes to the security of the Gulf, there's only one address. It's Washington. It's not Beijing, and it's not Moscow. Now, Beijing doesn't necessarily want that role. It's actually quite comfortable with the United States having that role. Keep in mind, coming back to the Strait of Hormuz, China does not want that strait to close. If anybody's going to keep it open, it's not going to be China and Russia. It's going to be the United States. So, with other words, those relationships are far more complex. And in that sense, this is very much a conflict that is not comparable with Afghanistan or Iraq. And sure, yes, you can argue, well, China, Russia want to see the United States fall, but they're not willing to pay the price for that if that means closing down the Strait of Hormuz. So yes, we have big power rivalry, but I also think one's got to see it proportionally.
I want to ask you one final question, one final big picture question on which we will end this interview. And that is, in your view, given everything that's happened and the stakes that have been involved, who would you say are the biggest winners and losers of this crisis, both regionally and globally?
I think time will tell, frankly. I mean, Israel obviously looks like a winner, but my guess is that Israel's going to pay a very heavy price. It's lost its international standing by and large, or in much of the world. This is going to have repercussions and going to ripple through Israeli society for a significant time to come. I think that the United States is going to be a superpower for some time to come. Not the only superpower necessarily, but a superpower for some time to come. But it also is going to pay a price on multiple levels. certainly not only because of the double standards that increasingly have been clear, both on the part of the United States and the part of the Europeans as it regards the Gaza conflict, but on the multiple other issues and problems that the Trump administration is causing, and the damage that it certainly internationally is the Trump administration is doing to the United States. All of those are things that still have to have to balance out. Now, keep one thing in mind: we had some significant damage done by Trump in his first term in office, and Biden was in many ways able to repair a lot of that. I think this time round, a lot more damage is being done, and a lot more serious damage. Trust in terms of just simply whether you want to study in the United States today? Is that the place you want to be? Do you want to run the risk of passing through passport control in the United States today? I
In
think
some
those
places, it's not even possible to study anymore.
are
Yeah.
I mean there are a lot of these factors, and it's going to take time for them to play out.
Dr. James Dorsey, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a real privilege and pleasure to talk to you.
It was my pleasure, Stefan. Thank you for having me.